I'm really happy with a class session I just had with students in a course exploring sexuality and gender from an Aztec, Yoruba, and Spanish Catholic perspective. We're going to look at how race was an imposition by the Spanish in the beginning in the 16th century. To better understand the Spanish conquest of Mexico, which involved a great number of indigenous allies, we looked at poems called Cantos Tristes de la Conquista. And I thought today, in order to begin, instead of going right to the text, I would ask my students to reflect upon whether or not they have lost someone. And in order to be vulnerable, I took the unusual step of talking about the death of my mother as a way of encouraging my students to think about what it feels like to lose. And they then opened up. They spoke about the losses in their own lives, and that created a space for us to commiserate, really, with what it might have meant to lose something as big and as great as the Mexicatl or the Nahuatl-speaking Aztec Empire. We can't imagine it, but we use that as a source to think through the pain. And my students had some very, very meaningful commentary. One of the passages in the poem says, Se nos puso un precio. They placed a price on our heads. And in thinking through this particular quote from the 1528 poem, one of my students said that to place a price on their head was another way of talking about slavery. I thought that was very insightful. Another student observed the fact that when you're thinking about a price, you change the value, the inherent value of that person. She went further to say that you end up placing a value on that person that comes from the buyer. And another student came back around and spoke some more. And she said that what it means is that the person's value now will be tied to the work they are capable of doing. It will be tied to labor. So this 1528 poem, in Spanish known as Los Últimos Días del Sitio de Tenochtitlan, the last days of the siege of Tenochtitlan, really had an impact on my students, and it was a useful tool for them to think through the process of interpreting the poem as old as this anonymous collective poem from 1528.